Troy Williams. And we've had him on the show before, and we're going to take you to that a little bit later. But he's calling from the federal prison tonight, where he's in custody because of a kangaroo court in Florida that did not allow him to present any, not three, not two, not one, none. He was not allowed to present any of his defense witnesses. That's what happened, and there isn't much anything anybody can do about it. So he got convicted in Florida because he was not allowed to put out any witnesses on the stand because the clerk of the court in Florida refused to send out his subpoenas while they held him in jail, so he couldn't send out the subpoenas. Isn't America a wonderful country? I love it. I went to Vietnam and nearly got myself killed because I believed in the Constitution and civil rights and the rule of law. Silly guy I was, silly person. Tonight, if we're ready to go to that interview, we have an interview I just did before I got to the studio from home. This is a picture of a little book. It's smaller than the Boy Scout handbook. It's maybe 1/10 the size. This is the cover of a rather tattered archive original, which I have in my possession. That's what the cover looks like. You can't even read what it used to say. It used to say State of Maine Official Archives. And now, ladies and gentlemen, taking my hat off for you that tuned in, we're short on staff here tonight. I want to read you, this is the inside of that little book. You turn it, you open it up, and the reason I'm showing you certified copies of it is because it is so fragile. This book, if you could read the date way in the bottom down here, the date you would see down here is 1825. That makes that volume 195 years old. It's the original volume, one of, I think, only probably 500 or 1,000 at most printed when Maine first became a state. And it was printed by Todd and Smith, printers to the state. That's what it says right above the date, in Portland, Maine. Now, Maine was not one of the original 13 colonies, and I don't want to make this into a big history lesson. The reason the original 13th Amendment, which most of you don't know what I'm talking about if you haven't watched my show before, is you're not aware that there are two 13th Amendments, both of them duly ratified. The original one was published in all the state archives. I'm going to read you briefly, and then we're going to go to Anthony Williams' call from a federal prison, I think less than an hour ago. It's 2 hours earlier in the day out there in Hawaii. But on page 45 of the State of Maine archives, after you see the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and the things you're familiar with, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, that you're all familiar with. But then there's a 12th, which the Democrats don't understand at all. It has to do with the ballots for president and vice president. And clearly, those that are hating Trump and just hate the fact that he won don't understand the president is not elected by popular vote. That's just a signpost guide of how misled a lot of people were. And we know since the days of Huey Long and probably Tammany Hall, votes can be stolen. It happens every election. It still happened here in Santa Barbara. Anyway, on page 45 in the state official archives, it has a 13th Amendment, nothing about slavery. I'm going to read it to you. It's short and it's really simple. And it may have a very big impact on Anthony Williams' case in Florida, which he'll be going back to appeal to SCOTUS. It reads, if any citizen of the United States shall accept claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. There it is, the original 13th Amendment they never talked about, and it's never been repealed. I've researched it. Other people have researched it. It's never been de-ratified. It was published from at least 1818 to 1870 or 1868 in some states. Then they came out with this bogus 13th. It's not bogus in its enactment. It's bogus because it's numbered wrong. And if you ever got one of these little handbooks, it gives you the Constitution and then the articles of the Constitution. And then it gives you the Articles of Amendment, or what we generally call just the amendment. And in here, there is a long, complicated 13th Amendment passed December 6th, 1865. And wait a minute, wasn't Lincoln already assassinated then? Here it is, right here. And I'm going to read it briefly, just the first few lines of this 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall, servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That's way different than the original 13th Amendment I just read you. And this is what the cover page of the archive. Now, this book here is from the state of Connecticut. The label here says 1838 Statutes of Connecticut. That makes this about 180 some years old. And in here we find the same thing, the same original 13th Amendment. Remember, this is 1838. It doesn't have this anti-slavery amendment in it. And yet it's got an amendment called the 13th Amendment. And you never heard of it. Your public schools lied to you. I can't say that enough. Your public schools lied to you. Can't wait to get my hands on the disclaimer where, well, let's go to Anthony. He called in. Are we ready to roll that?
We are.
My Valentine message from prison from Anthony Troy Williams, an innocent private attorney general hosed down, beat up, incarcerated, given kangaroo trials. Is it our government or is it a foreign power that makes up the bar that does this to good men trying to protect homeowners and keep them in their homes from fraudulent notes? Here we go.
You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
Anthony.
an inmate at a federal prison. This call is being recorded and is subject to monitoring. Hang up to decline the call or to accept. Dial 5 now. If you wish to block any...
Mr. Wagner.
Good evening, Mr.
How you
Williams.
doing? Yeah, I called an hour ago, but it never picked up.
Because I was asleep. I fell asleep waiting. I'm very, very tired today.
Okay. Yeah, so Rosie told you the news and stuff that they struck all y'all as witnesses.
Yeah, that happened after, on what day? Monday or Tuesday?
Yeah.
And that was because one of their witnesses turned over to your side and the judge was pissed off, or what were the circumstances?
Well, no, I think it's because I've basically embarrassed the government so bad they didn't want it to be even more with all y'all coming. It would look too bad on them. So, especially like you and Rudy, that y'all would have been just too much. Y'all would have been over the top, and it would have just exposed too much. So they was like, no, we just striking everybody from the mainland.
And yet they allowed all the prosecutors, witnesses from the mainland?
Yes. All the FBI agents from the mainland, they still let them come and testify.
That sounds highly biased.
It is. And like I told her, I was like, if you're going to let them, because her reasoning for quashing all y'all subpoenas that you all don't live here in Hawaii. I was like, none of those agents live here in Hawaii. Well, but they're relevant to the case here. I said, well, all my people that I'm calling are relevant to what I was doing. They understood what I was doing. They know what I'm fighting, and they know what, the things that I've been through with this corrupt system. So what are you talking about? I said, you violate me and her got into an argument because I told her, I was like, look, you're violating my Sixth Amendment constitutional right to call witnesses for my defense. So you just telling me you're just going to strike my witnesses just because they're not Hawaii residents?
This call is from a federal prison.
Yeah, she struck all of them. It's crazy.
Was she visibly upset over that one prosecutor's witness that told the truth instead of carefully constructed lies they'd taught them prior to testify?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the only one. It was two of them. Two of the government witnesses basically like, no, this man is a good man. I trust this man. This man is a man of integrity, high principles, high morals, and then after that meeting, after that hearing that day, then she had a meeting. It was like, well, I'm going to go with the witness list because I'm not going to have all these witnesses come from the mainland. She was like, well, she went each one of them, like, where are they from? I said, where they coming from? California, strike. Coming from Florida, strike. New York, strike. Georgia, strike. Illinois, strike. I said, well, how are you going to strike them? These people have firsthand knowledge of my business, what I do. A lot of these people are clients of mine, but they have nothing to do with Hawaii. They weren't any Hawaii clients.
Yet the prosecutors' witnesses from the mainland, they were allowed.
Right. Yeah.
That sounds highly prejudicial and biased to me.
Yeah, it is.
Unfortunately, the jury didn't get to hear that, did they?
No. No.
And she
No,
probably
not the jury.
and Judge Kobayashi probably admonished you not to mention anything to the jury about it.
Right, but that's not going to happen. It's going to get mentioned. I'm going to let them know.
This is I think you've got good grounds to appeal. The problem is that appellate judges are from the same bar card club that Leslie Kobayashi's from. And did you get that large envelope with the information I sent you?
Yeah, with the attorney letter, that was powerful.
I thought so.
That was a powerful. I want to write her.
I already did. Write her. I already wrote her, and I haven't got a response. I wrote her the same time I mailed that to you. I'm doing a live show in about hour and a half from now. We start, and we go on for 90 minutes. If you want to call me again and organize what you want the people, that show will be seen by hundreds to thousands of people here in this city in California. If you want to do that, if you can.
If I can get back on the phone.
Otherwise, I'm taping this now, Mr. Williams.
Okay, yeah, no problem. But yeah, the agents and the witnesses that they called, I exposed that every last one of them perjured themselves on the stand. I exposed every last one of them to be liars. Yesterday, the client that they had called, one of my former clients, and I asked, I said, have you ever went to the prosecutor's office and talked to the prosecutors before today? She said, no. I said, so you've never visited the prosecutor's office? No. You've never talked to them on the phone? No. You've never texted them? They never text you? Never emailed you? No. And I say, so are you saying you never went to and I pointed to both to the prosecutors. I said, so you never went to been in one of these prosecutors' office and talked to them before today? She's like, no. I say, so how did you know to show up for court today to testify? She was like, oh, I got a letter in the mail. So the prosecutor, Kenneth Sorensen, he's like, oh, Your Honor, can we have a sidebar? So he called a sidebar. He was like, Your Honor, I just want to put on the record that this witness has come by the office at least twice and talked to us. So I just want to, let the court know that what she stated is not true. She has, been to the office twice. So when we come back, so I said, Miss Madonna, I said, the prosecutor, we just called the sidebar and said that you've been to the office twice. Now, are you lying or are they lying? The government objected. Objection, Your Honor, objection. She's like, overruled. She's going to have to answer that. So she was like, I think I did go to the office one time. Oh man, it was funny. I'm talking about, it was funny. It was hilarious. I'm like, and I could just tell how the jury is like, so why'd you lie? What'd you lie for? And then what happened, she before that she had cried, I almost lost my home because of him and all this stuff, just crocodile tears, right? So Kobayashi called a recess so the jury can have it was time for their break. So when they left out, they came out. So she looked at the prosecutor, Yates, right after she just was crying, looked at him and smiled, So when the jury came back in, so I said, Miss Madonna, I said, before the jury came back in, I said, why did you look at the prosecutor, Yates, and smile? And the government objected. Objection. But Kobayashi's overruled. She has to answer that. Why did you, answer it? She was like, I smile at everybody. It's obvious that they told you to put on a show, by these crocodile tears. But I showed how she lied. She don't realize that she did an affidavit for me a few years ago. So I asked her, I said, did you file an affidavit stating that it was Edna Franco, Henry Malinay, and Rowena Valdez that scammed you and not me? No, I didn't. Can you give me Exhibit 815, please? Put it up. Is that your signature, Miss Madonna? Yes. But I don't remember the notary. I said, so you're saying that the notary forged this document, that the notary did not notarize this document in your presence? Yeah. I said, so you're saying that the notary forged this document? Yes.
God.
I'm like, the lies are just getting so unbelievable. Everybody knows before a notary is going to notarize a document, first of all, you got to present valid identification. They got to verify who you are.
Yeah.
Then you have to sign it in front of them, and then they're going to stamp it and notarize the document.
Yeah, and you could call her notary book. It's probably retired by now, and sitting in the county archives, and you could recall that notary book and prove that if you had enough time.
Yeah. I told Lawrence to contact him though, whoever the notary is, so he's supposed to contact him for me. But I also wanted to state this too, because there was a lot of things that were said by Lawrence. A lot of people thought he was, the one trying to sabotage my trial, but it really hasn't been Lawrence. He's actually been very helpful. I mean, he really has. He's actually done a lot of helpful things for me, and I want people to know that. Now if he was doing things that were detrimental, I'm gonna tell the truth. But I'm gonna tell the truth that he has been doing a phenomenal job in assisting me in defending myself. So I want people to know that it's not him that's really, trying to sabotage. It's really the prosecutor's office and Kobayashi basically, striking. But I think that was at the request of the government anyway. But no, he's been very helpful. He's been giving me a lot of the information that I need. Him and the two assistants that he hired. So they actually...
This call is from a federal prison.
A very, very good job for me.
You're speaking of attorney Lars Isaacson, your standby attorney.
Yes.
Right. They'll probably disbar him for that if you're acquitted.
Yeah, but he's done everything I've asked him to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I sent him an email because I was concerned. You apparently gave the clerk of the court my subpoena to send me, and we had talked sometime in December, I think, and
Right.
I didn't get it till January. It took almost 2 months for the U.S. Marshals to serve me that subpoena, and I sent him an email, and I said basically, I got a subpoena, but no voucher for travel expenses. I'd already booked myself and paid my own travel expenses, so I could be there on
Right.
the 3rd of February. And then he
Right.
emailed me back like really quick. He must have saw because I sent it early in the morning. He probably wasn't to the
Right.
office yet, and he probably saw it, and he got back to me quick. Said, "No, don't show up because your case on defense doesn't start till about the 17th." So
Right.
he was pretty quick. I got to give him that. Anything else you want people to know about the kangaroo court trial they're trying to give you?
Oh, well, I mean, it's totally unfair. They basically violate every constitutional right that I have, but I'm still killing them, though. I'm still exposing them. But it's getting.
Well, we just got cut off. That was a call from the Honolulu Federal Prison from Anthony T. for Troy Williams, and he uses his middle initial now to distinguish himself from a different Anthony Williams, who they try to confuse people with this other Williams, which has no relation to him and no connection to the Anthony Williams private attorney general who has been trying to save hundreds of people's homes. And I wish I got a few more minutes. I hope he can call me back in an hour and a half. If not, we'll have to make the show tonight live without him. Those of you that missed this live show today, Friday, too bad for you, because there's good information here. Anyway, that's what we got. Now back to live in the studio. And wow, here I am live in the studio. Wasn't that magic? That was an interview live from the federal prison in Honolulu, Hawaii, where apparently Judge Leslie E. Kobayashi thinks mainlanders are irrelevant unless they're testifying for the prosecutors. Beat the war drums. I don't see that in the Constitution where it says only the prosecutor's witnesses from one locality can testify, but the defense witnesses can't testify from the same location. And I'm even willing to testify under oath by phone, and they do that very often. They have people appear. Lawyers do it all the time. They make an appearance in court by phone. That's easily arranged. It's not a toughie. It seems to me Judge Leslie E. Kobayashi, she maybe needs to have a web page for her own impeachment. And since the Democrats are so anxious to impeach somebody, let's give them a Democrat-appointed judge to impeach. I think we could find a couple of them. Gloria Navarro in Las Vegas, a presiding judge there that so wanted to put the Bundys and kept the Bundys in prison for 666 days. Gee, 666. Isn't that a biblical number of evil? I think it is. Now I want to take you back a ways, even show you the opening of the interview we did almost exactly 5 years ago, this month, next week, right here in the studio when Anthony was sitting here explaining to me how he stops the crooked attorneys working for the bogus bank institutions or finance companies who use forged documents that have forged signatures, and someone should have gone to prison. Someone should have gone to prison for forging those documents, but our crooked courts who have their pensions, many of them, invested in bank stocks don't want to shut the banks down or make trouble for the banks. So they always rule for the evildoers that forge documents and steal people's homes. And let me quickly tell you how that works. Why should they use forged documents? There was a day we all sat there and we signed a piece of paper to get a loan so we could move into a house. What we weren't told, and you didn't see, I didn't see, is the bank officers signed that same document. In fact, in many cases, none of those officers signed that document. So it wasn't a real contract, number one. Number two, if you'd read through all the bank laws, you'd known you could send a notice of rescission and never make the first payment. But they didn't tell you that. And I don't recommend you try that because you start this whole process, it'll drive you crazy if you don't know what you're doing. Number three, after they run it through a fax-like machine and scan your notes, your promise to pay, the original note is a security instrument, they shred all that stuff and don't save it. If they simply saved it, put it in a file, it would cost them storage fees for 30 years or whatever it takes. And someone would have to rearrange it every time you refinance. They have to go find your original and send it back to you and shred it. So they shred them immediately. And I did a whole show with Valerie Lopez, who is as close to an expert as you're going to find, but she's not going to be allowed to testify for Anthony. By the way, this is Paul. He's an attorney, probably going to be disbarred soon. He was arrested in Honolulu somewhere for doing just what I'm describing and then attempting to steal somebody's property. It's unclear whether Paul's going to get away with it or not. A lot of attorneys are scamming and stealing properties. It's a very lucrative business. No wonder why we have so many newly minted billionaires with stolen property while homeless people are flooding the courts and the parks and getting put in jail. They used to have homes. What happened to their homes? Oh, it got stolen by one of these people that Anthony Williams was trying to stop as a private attorney general. And I looked at the statutes and they're somewhat confusing, but I think those that initiated, the Congress people that initiated the private attorney general statutes, they did it exactly for a time like now. And I think Anthony Williams is doing exactly what they intended him to do. Stop this criminality. Let's go back and watch this interview I did 5 years ago next week. Anthony Williams on the 21st of February would have been seated, I think, right here. And I interviewed him. And we'll give you a little bit of the intro music from Jen. Here she is. I'm William Wagner for Take Back America, live Friday here on the studio. I'm taking off my hat for you people that have the intelligence and the integrity to tune in. Because what you will hear and see tonight, you will not find on the local CBS, Fox News, CNN, or all the network weird TV with spinning lights and voluptuous blondes. What I have is something better. You've heard me talk many times about how Julie Witherspoon got screwed, even though she was serving in the U.S. Army. She got screwed, and then she really got screwed after a divorce by her husband, who was a pedophile. Referee, what was his name? Fiorello. Should they haul him in on the carpet and have them indicted for multiple violations of their civil liberties, felony evidence?
They absolutely need to. They need to review the case. They need to look at facts Look at facts. Look at fact. Look at fact. Look at facts.
Yeah, he raped her when she was still in high school, and he was her band teacher. You've heard me talk about, oh yeah, Marion Krause, who wrote this thick book documenting, and Marion Krause was here live on the show, and she documented page after page of the crimes committed not only by her attorney that she paid money for, but by the city attorney up there in Oregon. She also wrote this book, Abolished Oregon State Bar. But she couldn't get anybody to do anything about all these crimes. And I'm talking about documented crimes. No one would help her. Not her DA, not the Oregon Attorney General. And we talked to him. I personally talked to him. And I also talked to his chief assistant. And they said, we're looking into it. Well, it's been 4 years later. They're still looking into it. So all of this brings me to the point where I'm looking for solutions. You've heard me talk about Mary E. Webster's latest edition of the Federalist Papers and why they're important. We've done shows about that, but tonight I have something even better for you. Some of you will remember me. I don't get a cut out of Aphrodite Jones's book, Michael Jackson, The Conspiracy, but you can see my interview with her that turned her head around after the verdict came in not guilty, and she was saying, oh, come on, William, you know he did something at some time. And I said, Aphrodite Jones, didn't you see the evidence day after day? She said, no, I skipped every couple of days. I said, well, then you didn't see it. Go read the record. And she did. And that's when she wrote the book and said, you were right, William. It was a conspiracy. It was a setup. So then there's this book, which I talked about years ago. I can't find someone to produce this show. There's a fish in the courthouse. This is about the corruption of the judges in Ventura County. And this guy was a cop in Ventura County. And they ran him out of the county. I mean, he documents which judge got to be a judge because she slept with Judge so-and-so and then she gets promoted. He documents it and nothing happened. You've heard me talk about my favorite dentist, Leonard G. Horowitz, his book. I mean, we talked about this a decade ago. Nobody's stopping them from poisoning us with vaccines. And I also talked to you about this gal's book, Judy Wood. This is written like somebody wrote a PhD. This was a PhD thesis. And she has some amazing pictures I've never seen anywhere else, but they're in her book. But nobody has held the 9/11 Commission responsible for deliberately sabotaging the investigation. Nobody. Yet. Tonight with me on the show, oh, and I can't forget, my favorite. The book, I interviewed the author, Philip F. Nelson, his book, LBJ, The Mastermind. Have you ever seen this, Anthony? Anthony Williams is with us. Welcome to the show. Anthony Williams.
Thank you.
Private Attorney General. Private Attorney General. This book documents how the Vice President of the United States, the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, that gay man who was diddling his number 2 guy, Mr. Tolson, these two were next-door neighbors everywhere they lived in Washington, D.C. Between Hoover, head of the FBI, and Mr. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the psychopath from Texas, and the CIA agent, who was a young dude then, his name is George Herbert Walker Bush. These people, along with Clint Murchison, it's all documented in Nelson's book. You ought to read the book. It's about when the coup d'etat happened November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas. And it was all set up. Like Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, nothing happens in politics unless somebody made it happen that way.
That's correct.
There is no coincidence. There ain't no accidents. Nothing happens in politics unless they want it to happen. Tonight, I have the pleasure, and I rarely do this, we're going to spend the whole show. And I think it's going to be, what did you say, jaw-dropping and bra-popping? We have in Mr. Williams here a man who has taken upon himself to enforce the law when you're a crooked county district attorney like Tony Rackauckus in Orange County or Joyce Dudley in Santa Barbara County, but it's really hard to find an honest district attorney. Even if they start out honest,
Right.
the push to go corrupt is just tremendous. It's unbelievable what happens. So tell me, Mr. Williams, where were you born?
Born in Pineville, Louisiana.
And your father's name was?
Willie Williams.
And your mother's name was?
Barbara Williams.
And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
3 sisters and 2 brothers.
Are any of them wanting to be private attorney generals?
No.
Are they older than you?
All but one.
All but one. So you're the little guy in the family totem pole.
Right.
You got to prove yourself.
Right.
And you did.
Yes.
You went and did something. What caused you to want to do what you're doing?
Well, I got caught in the criminal justice system on a check charge that I shouldn't have been charged with. I fought it for about 2 years, had to hire an attorney. He basically told me to plead guilty. It would be easier, even though I was innocent.
Of course.
And at
Easier
that
for
point-
him.
Right. So, and I was like, well, why should I have to plead guilty for something I didn't do that I know I was innocent of? He said, well, Mr. Williams, the way it works in this county is they have a 100% conviction rate, and they're not going to take it to trial if they know they can't beat you. So you're going to either plead guilty or they're going to make your life miserable.
This was Louisiana.
No, this was Alabama.
Oh, Alabama.
Yeah, this was in Alabama. So I had to plead guilty. So when I went to go plead guilty, I said, I'm not pleading guilty because I'm guilty. I'm pleading guilty because you're forcing me to plead guilty. And so the judge was like, I cannot accept that. I cannot accept that plea. So I at least wanted to get it on the record. Even at that time, I didn't know the law, but I knew to at least put that on the record. And so once I pleaded guilty, they gave me 2 years probation. And I made a promise to myself. I said I would never walk in this courtroom again and not be able to defend my own rights. And that's what got me started on this path.
That's what did it. Everybody has something. And that was what year was that?
That was 1999. It was 2001 when I pled guilty. And from 2001 to now is what I've been doing.
Wow. And you've got an actual badge issued by who?
By United States Office of the Private Attorney General. It's a de jure federal agency that myself and some other private attorney generals set up. It's not a de facto governmental agency, it's a de jure.
De jure.
Right. De jure means the lawful and rightful government and not the de facto, which is the government that the people think is lawful and the one that they presently obey, but that's not lawful.
I understand you, actually. I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure most people do. There's a difference between what's statutorily legal and what's constitutionally lawful. And what Mr. Williams is talking about is the we, the people, constitutional lawful.
Right.
And that's not what we're living in. What we're living in is something akin to Nazi Germany. And in fact, I think we're actually worse than Nazi Germany. Even under Hitler's Nazi Germany, they did not have little social workers with little badges and a cop back them up, walk into your house and say, we're taking these children, emergency. It's an emergency taking of your children. You're like, wait, what happened to my trial? What happened to my 7th Amendment?
Right. 6th Amendment.
7th Amendment says you can't take anything under common law worth more than $20 without giving me a jury trial before you take it. They just ignore that.
That's correct.
They just ignore it. So you're not living in the America that this we the people starts to document. You're living in a Nazified America where social workers can steal your children at will. I would call it kidnapping.
That's what exactly it is.
That's what it really is, government kidnapping. And it's for profit. They get incentive bonuses for stealing children. Was that ever an issue in your life where they get into this? Did you ever help any of the moms or dads that had their kids taken?
Well, not in my
Practice.
journey. Yeah, not in my journey. My journey mostly was criminal, criminal justice system, getting guys out. The criminal justice system that was wrongfully incarcerated, wrongfully charged, wrongfully convicted, foreclosure defense, tax relief, fighting against the IRS, because if people don't know, the IRS is not a governmental entity. It's a private corporation, which you don't have to pay them unless you voluntarily.
Volunteer. But they get real nasty if you don't volunteer,
Right. If you don't know the law.
if you don't know the law.
Right.
In fact, if you don't believe what he just said, because April 15th is coming up really soon, and I'm going to have to dig up that old footage you haven't used for 10 years. I don't have it tonight. But if you take your 1040 form and look in the bottom left or bottom right corner, there should be a federal ID number, because every federal government form has a federal, and 1040 is not it. That's just the title of the form. There's a little number down in the lower left and right, and the 1040 doesn't have it. At least the last time I filled one out, they didn't have it. So you know that's not an official government form. So why are you paying those people? Because you don't want to go to jail.
Right.
Just as he said, I'm pleading guilty because you're forcing me to. And that's why you're paying the tax, because you know somebody will come knocking on your door and say, come with me.
Right.
You didn't pay your taxes.
Right.
Well, I volunteered 10 cents and I mailed my dime. Isn't that enough? No. And you know, that brings me to my interviews I did with Erwin Schiff out of Las Vegas, Nevada, who's now sitting in a federal prison, I think somewhere in northern Indiana. And he proved to me, he had the IRS code book. He said, look, if you don't pay the liquor tax, there's a penalty. If you don't pay this tax, there's a penalty. And we flipped through it, and he says, now look, federal personal income tax, look for the penalty. And there wasn't any.
Right.
It's not there. So why are you paying? You're paying because you know, or if you've watched my show, Erwin Schiff went to prison. But he didn't go to prison because of that. He went to prison because of a book. I forgot to bring it tonight. It's called The Federal Mafia. You ever seen his book?
I've never seen that book.
It's called The Federal Mafia. There's no naked women. There's no cleavage. There's no calls to overthrow the government violently. All it does is detail point by point why you can write the U.S. Treasury and say, give me back my last 3 years' income taxes. You took it fraudulently from me by deception. And I did that interview. It's on my YouTube clip with KCAL 42, or was it KCAL 41? And he held up, and I blacked out his address. But you can see, he got $41,000 back. He lived in Las Vegas. He got $41,000 back. So, you're down in Alabama. They do this to you. When did you get your private attorney general office set up, and how many years did it get you to that point?
2002 is when I officially set up. From that point on, I basically was a lone wolf. Didn't know too many people that were knowledgeable in the venue I was undertaking. Didn't know a lot of people that weren't scared to do what I was doing. Because, you know, when they come with the police officers, because my door got kicked in by U.S. Marshals, got taken to jail for a warrant for a driving on a suspended license.
Is that how you met Paul Murphy?
No, I met him.
He was one of the U.S. Marshals that kicked in your door? No?
No, but you know, this was the state of Tennessee. I fought the state of Tennessee. I ended up having to sue the governor, 3 judges, 4 police officers, the DA, a public defender, the director of Department of Revenue, Department of Motor Vehicles, and all their wives. And
I like that. Did you watch that Charlie Sprinkle thing I did?
yes.
You did?
Yes.
You noticed he said I sued all their wives
Yes.
as aiding and abetting in the crime.
And I used that. I sure did.
I love it.
I sure did.
Charlie's watching from heaven. He
Right.
said, attaboy, Mr.
right.
Williams.
I sure did. And when, you know, we had to go to court, so, you know, I got the governor and, you know, the judges and all them having to answer, you know, this lawsuit that I filed. And they basically left me alone because they saw I wasn't going nowhere. They saw that no matter how many times they arrested me unlawfully and illegally, that even if you locked me up, I'm still going to fight for truth. I'm still going to fight for justice. They end up banning me from going to that jail because I was teaching all the inmates how to win their cases. So
That reminds me of a young guy who was a libertarian candidate, and they arrested him on some drug charge. They sent a female, a very pretty, voluptuous female, to ask him for a little pot. And he said, oh, well, you know, I don't sell that stuff. I don't know where you get it. Oh, come on, honey. So, all right, here's a dime's worth, you know. Gotcha.
right.
They put him in the jail out here near Bakersfield somewhere, and I don't know what he got, but they let him out 4 or 5 months early. because he was teaching the other inmates
Right.
how to fight for their rights. And they just said, "You're just too much trouble. We'll just get out of here.
Right.
This guy knows too much. Get him out of here."
Right, right.
Well, that's good. So when did you sign on your second private attorney general to join your group? What year was that?
Well,
Who was that?
Well, 2009 is when the really big push when I started getting more people. They started seeing the YouTube videos of me, confronting the police officers, on traffic stops, going to the police station, confronting them. 2000, I think it was 11, I confronted the FBI. The FBI started calling around a lot of my clients and telling them that I was on the FBI most wanted list.
Really?
Yeah.
The FBI called your clients
Yes.
and told them that?
Yes, the FBI called my clients, said I was on the FBI most wanted list, that I changed my number every 30 days, that I travel around the country defrauding people. And so when my clients were calling me, I said, "Now, are you sure that this was the FBI?" So we looked the number up, reverse looked it. Sure enough, it was the FBI. So I had 3 of the clients to come with me as witnesses to the FBI office as witnesses. I videotaped it. It's on YouTube. You can just type in Anthony Confronts FBI, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. The agent was scared to come out his office to confront me. They sent an agent named John down, and he basically asked me when I saw this agent to be reasonable with him. Yes. Asked me to be reasonable with him.
Can we go find that clip? Will we find that on YouTube, Randy?
Anthony Confronts FBI. Part 3 is the bulk of the conversation.
Part 3.
Yeah, but
Anthony confronts FBI. Whose channel is it on?
It's just when you just type in the YouTube channel, it'll make it
Okay,
come
just
up.
anywhere
Yeah,
on YouTube.
Yeah, anywhere on
Anthony
YouTube.
Confronts
Yeah.
Okay, so 2009, that's when the big housing bust starts to hit and they start to scream, "Too big to fail.
Right.
We got to bail out the banks so we can save America."
Right.
Was that crap?
All of it was crap, and I'm gonna tell you why. What you alluded to earlier with the IRS, most people don't realize the Federal Reserve System was set up in 1913,
Right?
but the IRS was also set up in 1913.
That's
The
true.
exact same year, like you
Right.
said, what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said. Anything that happens, it was made to happen. It wasn't by happenstance. It wasn't by coincidence. It was planned that way. It was orchestrated that way. So from 1913 to 1933, they basically bankrupt the United States. So in 1933, the United States went completely bankrupt. That's when FDR suspended the gold standard,
That's correct.
But he gave the American people under House Joint Resolution 192 a remedy, but they never told nobody about it. So basically, if you're not one of the ones that's doing any research, you really don't know about this statute. But what
Tell
they
us
did,
about that statute.
well, it basically says that the United States is obligated to pay all the debts of its citizens, dollar for dollar, because they took the citizens' ability to pay any debt when he suspended the gold standard. Because according to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 through 10, the only lawful money is gold and silver.
That's what it says.
Right. So the Federal Reserve notes that people think is money is actually a debt instrument. You're just passing along a debt. That's the reason why debt ceiling keeps increasing. No matter how much money the American people paying out, it never seems to decrease.
They don't want it to
Right,
decrease.
exactly.
That's what keeps them empowered.
Exactly. The way the system with the...
That was 1933 or 1934?
Well, 1933 is when
We went
they
bankrupt.
went bankrupt, and also when the House Joint Resolution was passed into law.
Which House resolution?
House Joint Resolution 192.
192.
Right.
And so we're supposed to be able to send our tax bill to the government and have them pay it for us?
That's correct. Any bill, no matter what it is.
Well, that was the interview I did with Anthony, who you heard earlier, a recording from about an hour before we went live on our scheduled time here on Friday, Valentine's Day, which I'm sure most of you are out with your sweetheart and you're not watching this show. Shame, shame, shame. But you'll catch us on the rerun. We'll give you the hours that this show reruns. Usually you can find either Take Back America or On Second Thought on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday or Saturday at 7:30, except Friday we do the live shows, usually starting at 7. And the reason I bring up Anthony is because I met him, right? He was right here. And then we had him at the Crown Plaza, where we, the people, attempted to form our own grand jury so we could indict criminals like Thomas Snedden, that crooked DA of Santa Barbara, who wasted millions of taxpayers' dollars trying to put an innocent Michael Jackson in prison for something he didn't do. He didn't do with the little Miss Avizio, he didn't do it with Star Avizio, and he didn't do it with Gavin Avizio. It was all BS. And an all-white jury, or I should say pale-faced like mine, jury, found that very black man, Michael Jackson, innocent on 10 felony counts. And right at the end of the trial, that sneaky snake Snedden slipped in 4 lesser misdemeanors, as if to beg the jury, oh, please, jury of Michael Jackson, oh, please give me at least one conviction on a misdemeanor. I know we didn't prove the elements of all the 10 felonies. In fact, we didn't prove hardly any elements. But give me a misdemeanor so you haven't wasted your time. 5 months. That trial was the longest trial in California history where the government lost 100% because of complete bogus. I was there. I watched every day of it except 3. And I sat usually right behind Katherine Jackson or behind Tito Jackson or one of his brothers in the first media row. Usually. But that's after I got my media pass. I already had a media pass, but I had to get a special media pass to go to that trial and sit in the media row. All the time, everybody back in those days know I've been doing this show for 5 years, and that was 15 years ago. I'm in my 20th season of doing this television show, On Second Thought, where I try to get people to have second thoughts. It doesn't always work. Some of you think I'm a little bizarre. And by the way, Miss Philippin, or whatever your name is, go research in the library for these documents. You won't find them. And by the way, when Anthony was talking about de jure private attorney general versus a statutory common law, or statutory common law is one thing, that's de jure. The statutory private attorney generals are laid out in the statutes. And the government you have is the government de facto. It's not the government the founding fathers had. In other words, you have an image that is not 3D of government. The Bar Carded Association is a foreign power, and that's what this 13th Amendment found in this 1838 volume. This is the actual real book, the real thing. This is not a copy, not a reprint. And you can see here, I'll put it over here where you can zoom in on this camera. You can see the face page on this. See that? This is the real deal, the actual volume. It's not a reprint, okay? I've made some reprints because I hate bringing these out of the storage. This is a shot of the covers of 2 of the books, one from Rhode Island and one from, and you can see how old they are. These are really old volumes. And this is from the state of Maine. I prepared these, and you can see, I showed you earlier in case you just tuned in. This is the cover. You can't even read where it says state of Maine, and this is about a 1/4 inch thick, smaller than a Boy Scout hand manual. And you open it up, and this is what you see in the front page. You see this. And there it says, the state of Maine, 1825, published by printed by Todd and Smith, printers to the state. Now, Maine was not an original 13 colonies. It was a break-off from the state of Massachusetts. I think that's part of the reason they didn't have much time to prepare a state archive listing their state constitution. And here, on page 43 of the state of Maine, as you can see in the close-up here, right up here, you see Article 13 of the amendments. And it reads just exactly like all the others did in all the other states. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any retained present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or any of them states. Okay, it reads the same. There it is. Here's the people from the state of Massachusetts, I believe, who signed the documents. John Hancock's right at the top of that list. These are really old volumes, not reprints. This is not fiction. This is the real deal. And I have 4 of these volumes in my personal possession. One is right here. The others I didn't bring because I don't want them to deteriorate. That's the problem with these things. They get really old, and they used acid bleach paper in those days, and still did up till, in fact, even still today, they publish things with acid bleach paper. And after about 50 years, it starts to crumble to dust, depending on how many washes they gave to get the acid out. And I have each one of these in a separate envelope. These are the copies of them. I said I want to show you this. And I said, I wasn't joking. This is the document, okay? The subpoena I received, I think it was January 24th, the U.S. Marshal comes knocking on my door. But see the date on it? It was stamped November of 2019. People, it doesn't take 2 months from Hawaii to the LA Marshal's office, and I talked to the marshal. He was a really nice guy. I actually videotaped him at my door because he was on my property. I can do what I want when he's on my property. And I taped, he was a really nice guy. He said, I had to get up at 3 in the morning to be here to make sure you didn't go to work or something, and I miss you. I said, well, you could have just sent me a letter, and I would have accepted. I'd been happy to testify in Anthony Troy Williams' case. I'm still happy to testify. Today's the 14th. Next week will probably be the end of the trial. They had like 2 weeks to present their witnesses from the mainland or wherever. He's going to get like 1 day. He's got 2 witnesses, I think. I spoke briefly to one of them. And then his defense is over. Frankly, I don't think they proved anything he did criminal. And I know the man, he didn't have any criminal intent. This guy, Paul, former bar card holder, maybe still has a bar card in Hawaii, he's been arrested, I am told, on good authority. I don't know if he's sitting in jail, but he ought to be. And one of these documents, I think it's from Rhode Island, dates back to 1822. Now, they published this original 13th Amendment, and it may sound boring to you, but I'm telling you, it's the linchpin. When you do real research and you look in the archives, I did. And I had the archives in Connecticut. The archivist sent me a certified copy, and I have that in my possession. Here's the video I did about it. So this is still the law, even though you've never heard of it. And there's a lot of people who like to get rid of the Second Amendment too. I'm sure the Founding Fathers would like to crawl out of their grave and strangle these people, that the Democrats that want to get rid of the Second Amendment, your right to bear arms. It wasn't created so you could go hunting for deer or quail. It was created so you go hunting for tyrants in your government. That's what it was created for. I didn't create it. Our founding fathers, among we the people, did. Anyway, here's a video. Show it when it's on YouTube. You can find it if you look. But I thought I'd share it with you tonight. Roll it. Here's part of the proof that the missing, hidden, original 13th Amendment really happened and is still really law in the United States. State of New Hampshire. I, Brian Nelson Buford, archivist for the state of New Hampshire, having been duly authorized by the Secretary of State William G. Gardner to authenticate copies of records and papers kept by the Department of State, do hereby certify that the following and heretofore attached, consisting of 3 pages, are true copies of the original document on file at the Division of Archives and Records Management. Now here is, this is not a copy, this is an original certificate here. This is the gold seal of the state of New Hampshire. Behind it we have the record from the Journal of the House of Representatives for the state of New Hampshire, dated here December 9th, 1812, 200 years ago. And it reads here very easily, Journal of the House. The committee appointed to take into consideration certain laws and resolutions passed by the legislatures of Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont, and other documents accompanying the same report, etc. The resolves exhibited, and they further reported that it is, in their opinion, noticed expedient to adopt or approve the other proposed amendments to the Constitution of the United States, which report was accepted, whereas His Excellency the Governor of this state has laid before the General Court a resolution passed by the Congress of the United States in the words following, to wit, resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses occurring, and here again you see the date, December 9th, 1812. In the November session, the houses occurring that following the section be submitted to the legislatures of the several states, which, when ratified by the legislatures of the 3/4 of the states, shall be valid and binding as part of the Constitution of the United States. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office, trust, profits under them, or either of them. Therefore, resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives in General Court convened, that the foregoing amendment proposed by Congress to the Constitution of the United States be and the same is hereby on the part of this state agreed to, ratified, and confirmed, and be it further resolved that His Excellency the Governor be requested to transmit copies of the foregoing resolution to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States, and to each of our senators and representatives in Congress, and to each of the governors of the several states. And then it goes on to another thing. But on the back of these, we have the statement in red ink. I do hereby certify the copy of this sheet and a copy of the original document and file at the Division of Archives and Records Management, State of New Hampshire, January 12th, and it's signed here by Brian Nelson Buford. Same thing on the other copy of these pages. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this, what we have before us here, this is clearly part of the evidence that the amendment, the one we know as the 13th Amendment, was really the 14th Amendment. This was the original, now hidden 13th Amendment, ratified by Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, way back in December and earlier of 1812, and was part of the reason the British invaded us. Because basically we had said to them, your barristers, your lawyers, and those that hold an oath to the Great Britain, you're not even a U.S. citizen, so you can't be judges in America, you can't hold any public office at all. This has been hidden from the American people now for over 150 years now. 200 years after New Hampshire passed this resolution, this became the original 13th Amendment and was republished. And retired police officer Tom Dunn, David Dodge, discovered this in New Hampshire, an original constitution. And this relates to the interview I did about a year ago with Alfred Adask near Utopia, Texas. So what this means is that all the judges that hold office, all the lawyers that belong to a bar association, bar stands for British Admiralty Registry, or British accreditation registry, bar. So any member of the bar, anybody who claims they have an honor, and just when someone says, I can be a judge or I can be a member of the court system, but you can't, that is in effect claiming an honor, making you unequal. This amendment was passed specifically and precisely to make all American citizens equal, to make sure that every court position was open to election and holding by anybody, not just lawyers, not just bar associations, because they had 4 bar associations out of London back in these days. We're talking 200 years. This has been hidden ever since Abraham Lincoln, also a lawyer, was president and signed and declared the emancipation of slaves in America during the American Civil War, and he renamed that the 13th Amendment. Nevertheless, from 1812 to 1860, many states published versions of the Constitution with 13 amendments before the Anti-Slavery Act. This is amazing. And There isn't a lawyer in the land that's going to want to believe this, and they don't want you to know about it. Because if you knew about this and you knew what the common law was, you would understand the common law protects you. The statutory law and all the other kinds of laws that they try to drag you and get you to accept as jurisdiction is in effect gutting your rights, destroying your rights. I'm William Wagner, and I hope I've given you second thoughts. Well, that was not me, that was William Wagner a couple of years ago. Now I've learned a little bit more, but the 13th original, now hidden amendment is still the law. It's still the law. And as you saw that gold seal on that tape of the one I got from the archivist in Connecticut, that validates it. They've got it. It's still there. The lawyers simply ignore it because if they recognize it, they would lose their exclusivity in control of our courts. These bar-carded courts where the judge used to be a bar-card member, you and I could run. And this leads me to a guy named Alfred Adask, or Al Adask. And he did something that really ticked off the Texas Bar Association. He ran for a judgeship, and he was just a carpenter. And they made a big stink, and the Texas Bar came in and said, "No, you can't run. You're not a member of our club." And Al Adask said, "Well, according to the Constitution, we're all equal." And under the original 13th Amendment, that whole thing about titles of nobility is to keep us equal. So nobody say, "Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm more equal than you are." Why do lawyers on the East Coast and a few other places put Esquire after their name on their official letterhead? Esquire is a title of nobility, and that's what the 13th Amendment was clearly passed and ratified, published for 50 years to make it clear we're all equal. So even if you haven't been a member of the bar, you can run for judge, you can run for prosecutor, the county DA, you can run any of those offices. We're all equal under the law. But now the Bar Association and most judges want to say, "Oh, no, you must go to law school and become certified like us." Here's the interview. I had to go out to the Central Hill Country of Texas to find this guy. It's really hard to get this interview. And we're all supposed to be equal under the law. Hello? But we're not. We're not equal. You know why? Some people can run for offices that you and I cannot run for. They're called judges. And you can't run for it. And they're called district attorney. And you and I can't run for it. But once upon a time, anybody could run for judge. And in fact, lawyers were forbidden to be judges. They could not be judges. They could not be elected judges. They wouldn't even let them into the courtroom. Bailiffs would keep the lawyers out. And they snuck in because they wrote people's wills on their last testaments, and then they had controversy, and so the lawyer had to come into the courtroom to testify as to the will of somebody that died, and some descendant is saying, "I got cheated." And so that's how they wiggled their way back into the courtroom. And now they've created bar associations over the last 75 years and said only lawyers can be judges. This is nonsense. I tracked down the man that got the documents and printed the last copy of the original 13th. His name is Alfred Adask, and I had to go to the hill country of Tennessee, and believe me, it was hot, dry, and I don't want to ever go back there again. Out in the middle of central Texas somewhere, someplace off from San Antonio. Here's my interview with Alfred Adask, and it's riveting. Listen to this guy. Central Texas somewhere. I'm not sure where we are.
We're in the hill country.
They call it the hill country in Texas, with Alfred Adask. Got hold and actually published, he says, more than 300, maybe up to possibly 1,000 or more of these books on the missing 13th Amendment. Alfred, tell me why Larry Dodge and the retired police officer Tom Dunn came to you with this information. Why did they bring it to you, and what did you do with it?
Tom Dunn and Larry Dodge were sitting around in a library in Belfast, Maine. Oh, back probably 1989, in that vicinity, approximately that time frame, 90, thereabouts. And they asked the librarian to bring them the oldest copy. They were arguing something about the Constitution. They asked the librarian to bring them the oldest copy of the Constitution she had in that library, and that library went back at least into the 1800s, and I think it may have actually existed in the 1700s, if I remember correctly. She brought them the oldest copy of the Constitution they had, and they thumbed it open, and it had a 13th Amendment on it that they'd never seen before. And it involved titles of nobility. It prohibited titles of nobility, and it prohibited honors. And titles of nobility are to this day prohibited in the Constitution of the United States. They prohibit them for both the states and for the federal government. But this one not only prohibited the titles of nobility, it prohibited honors, and it provided a penalty. If you received a title of nobility, if you received an honor, you would forfeit your citizenship. That doesn't mean you'd be extradited and sent to another country. It just means that you could not hold public office, you could not vote. You were out of the political process if you took a title of nobility. The amendment was proposed about 1810. They started researching. They said, where did this come from? They'd never heard of it before. They started researching. Turns out this missing 13th Amendment was proposed about 1810. And they needed 9 states to ratify. And 8 states ratified by into 1812. And the War of 1812 broke out. Everybody forgot about the amendment during the war. And in the aftermath of the war, they didn't think about it until about 1819. And I think it was President Monroe at the time. The president said, what are we going to do about this amendment? Are we going to pass this thing or not? Because they'd had 8 states voted for it, and 4 states, 5, they needed 9, and they had, I think they needed 9, but they had 4 or 5 states hadn't yet ratified or commented on it. So they contacted all these states and said, are you going to ratify or not? The problem shows up in Virginia. Virginia apparently ratified. And it is believed that they sent notice of their ratification by publishing a new edition of their state constitution, which included a copy of the United States Constitution as an appendix at the back. And this new copy of the state constitution, this new version, this new federal constitution included the missing 13th Amendment. The law that ordered them to produce and publish this new edition of the state constitution with the federal constitution, it specifically said they had to send a copy to the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and to Thomas Jefferson. I think there were 4 people altogether. All right? But it is believed by Dodge and Dunn that it was by this means that they served notice on the federal government that they had in fact ratified this amendment. It's virtually inconceivable that they would have ordered the production of a brand new state constitution with a brand new copy of the federal constitution with an amendment that they didn't believe belonged to. And Virginia, of course, was the political powerhouse of the country at that time. Something like 4 of our first 5 presidents came from Virginia. It's inconceivable that Virginia would make a mistake about whether an amendment was or was not on the federal constitution. The problem is that when Dodge and Dunn went into the Virginian archives, they can't find any records from the legislature from that time period. They just seemed to be missing. It may be they can be found today, but they couldn't be found back in the early 1990s. The result was there's not absolute proof that Virginia ratified this amendment. So there's a debate. Was it ratified by 9 states or was it not ratified by 9 states? There's a debate. But what Dodge did, David Dodge, he took his van and he started traveling around the country. And he went from archive to archive around the United States looking for evidence of this missing 13th Amendment. And it turns out that he found it in, I don't know, 8, 10, a dozen different archives. I don't know how many archives he researched, but he found 23 or 26, I don't recall the number now, this information. You're asking me about things that were fresh in my mind 15, 20 years ago, and they're not quite so fresh today. But he found 23 or 26 states and territories that had published this amendment as ratified in documents that they'd published over a period from 1819 up until 1870 something. Over a period of more than 50 years, this amendment had been published off and on, not always at the same time, but 26 states and territories. If it wasn't ratified, it is almost inconceivable that these states could have published this amendment by accident. I mean, the first time one of the states published it by accident, the president or somebody said, "Hey, all you hicks out there in TV land, wake up! The amendment wasn't ratified. The word should go out. You can't propagate an error like this, or you shouldn't be able to, for 50 years. Nevertheless, it was published for over 50 years, and the result is a mystery. Dodge accumulated this information. He brought it to me in part because I was publishing a magazine called The Anti-Shyster. We were critical of attorneys. It was Dodge and Dunn thought that this amendment, because it prohibited titles of nobility, it would prohibit attorneys who use the title Esquire after their name, which is a title of nobility. It would prohibit them from holding public office or even voting. And they were all eager to get at the attorneys. And I'm publishing a magazine called Anti-Shyster, and they said, he's the guy. We got to get to him. They thought I had 100,000 subscribers. At the time, I was publishing maybe 10,000 copies of the magazine a month. They had misunderstood how many people were reading my magazine, but they brought it anyway. And I wrote 3 articles on it over a period of several months. And eventually I assembled those 3 articles into a book. And it included, 60 pages, I don't recall clearly, maybe 80 pages of copies of the different documents.
Now, it turns out there's a reason Dodge was the hippie and the other guy was the retired Philadelphia police officer who's now buried in Arizona. But I actually met Dodge. He was making bread down in Miami Beach when I interviewed him last. We don't have time to show you that interview tonight. There's a part 2 to this, and his name is Alfred Adask, and I hope you look it up on YouTube. It's a really great interview from 2011, almost a decade ago. Now, he did win his right. Al Adask did win his right, I forgot to tell you, to run for judge. He didn't win, but the ultimate Supreme Court of Texas, their highest court in Texas, said, yes, he's right. You don't have to be a member of the club to run for judge. And he did get to run. He didn't win, but he proved his point. He was just a carpenter who got angry when his children were taken from him wrongfully by CPS. And by the way, that's the same state where a CPS supervisor was murdered just a couple of years ago by someone, I think another person, who had their children taken. And all I can say is God has strange ways of meting out justice. So I want to show you part 2 of here because we're almost done. But keep in mind, this is still the law, even though it's not printed in any books. Just like you have a common law right to breathe air. It doesn't have to be written down. The original 13th Amendment still stands. All attorneys have lost their citizenship. So if they join the bar and later ran for judge, they don't have citizenship. Every judge is a bogus judge, except for the Supreme Court for a very specific reason, dealing with the Constitution and how they're appointed. All right, here we go, part 2 of Al Adask.
This was their attempt to declare absolute equality across the board for everyone in the country. Huh? There would have been no advantages. Didn't matter. Were you a Wall Street financier? No big deal. You would have no more rights than somebody who's running a little farm in Iowa. All right? It was a spectacular attempt to equalize across the entire country, and it was removed. Where does it sit right now? Here's one of the interesting things about it. If you've looked at any modern amendments, you'll see that when they're proposed, they give you 7 years to ratify. If an amendment's not ratified in 7 years, forget it. It's done. They put a time limit on it. There was no time limit declared on the 13th Amendment. All right? Even if it were true that Virginia didn't ratify back in 1819, even if that were true, and it's probably not, but even if it were true, the truth is that 13th Amendment is still a live issue. They never set a time limit on it. In theory, you could run that.
Thank you, Alfred Adask, for that interview. I want to show you just briefly here my great-great-grandfather, Johann Nicholas Wagner. Can we get him there for a quick shot? We've come to the end of this show on February 14th. Can we get this on the other camera? Yeah. I want to thank all you people. He's the old guy celebrating his 60th wedding anniversary in 1893. He's in the center. He's my great-great-grandfather, Johann Nicholas Wagner. Thanks a lot, great-great-granddaddy. I appreciate it. And one last thing I have to show you is something that was made for me. Here we got to go to the other camera, I think, get a wide shot. Right there on the center camera. This was made for me by Alina Solvak and the Czech fans for William Wagner. It's Michael Jackson, Love is the Key. I'm William Wagner. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you catch this on the rerun.
at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas, the prairie sky is wide and high. Deep in the heart of Texas, the sage in bloom is like perfume. Deep in the heart of Texas, reminds me of the one I love. Deep in the heart of Texas,
the coyotes wail along the trail.
Deep in the heart of Texas,
the rabbits rush around the brush.
Deep in the heart of Texas,
the cowboys cry, ki-yip-ki-yay.
Deep in the heart